everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video where we're going to do a bit of watercoloring. Sometimes it's one of those techniques that you really have to be in the mood for, and it can take quite a bit of time. And I love the look of watercoloring, I always have, but sometimes you just want that watercolored look without actually having to spend hours doing it, you know what I mean? So I want to share a technique with you that I like to call DIY watercolor stamping. It gives you the really cool look of watercolor, but you don't actually have to do anything hard to make it. So why don't we jump on in? It's really fun. I'm using new products from Simon Says Stamps, Kisses, and Hugs releases. This one is the painted wreath, and I'm going to pull out some Karin markers to do this. So before I actually go any further, I want to tell you, you can use any watercolor markers for this. You don't have to use Karin markers. It's just what I have and what I like to use. You're just going to want to color your stamps. I have two different shades here. I've got pink and red, and I'm coloring the hearts. I like using two colors because it gives me a variation, kind of like you would get with actual watercoloring. And I always spritz my stamp before I actually stamp the paper because that's going to get those colors moving. You're not going to get a splotch of color. The other thing I'm using is watercolor paper because, of course, that's going to give you the texture, and that's what you're going for. So here I'm using a green now, and I'm covering over the green areas. And I also wanted to add a little bit of variation to that, so I decided to come back in with blue, and I'll only put that on certain sections of those green areas. That way it'll mix and create another color, kind of like what I did with the red, but in this case I'm actually not mixing the two as I'm putting the markers down, and rather I'm doing it in two stages. I actually decided to add a little bit more red to my heart, so I came back in. That's one of the nice things about this stamping technique is you can add more and more layers on top of what you're doing to get different looks. So I really liked how that added some nice shading to my hearts, a little bit more contrast than the first round of stamping. And then finally I'm coming in and coloring in those little berries that are in between the hearts and the leaves, and I used purple for that. So look at that. In no time at all, we have a background completely stamped and watercolored. It looks beautiful, and it took almost no time at all to do this. Now you can add a background to it if you'd like. I decided to do a little ink smushing to create my background, and for this I used some spun sugar distress ink, and I'm just smushing that right over top of my watercoloring to create a background. I'm using a piece of plastic to help me move that color onto my background and get it just where I want it. And I also used some blue from the Karin markers to add a little bit more touch of color here and there. This looks really, really cool, and it dried beautifully. I'm going to bring in some Distress Spray Stain. This is a silver color, and I'm just going to splatter this over my background. You don't have to do this. I like splatters. I know a lot of you who watch my channel watch me do this all the time, so it's a totally optional step, but I like how it adds that nice touch of silver, which I'm going to accentuate by adding some of this matte silver cardstock from Simon Says Stamp around the edges of my card panel. I trimmed it down so it's a little bit larger than the card panel itself. And then this is going to get set onto my card. Now this card isn't an A2 size card. It's actually 5 by 6.5, so it's not even a 5 by 7 card, although I probably would put it in a 5 by 7 envelope. I did put this panel onto my card with some foam tape, and then the next thing I did was create my sentiment. So I'm pulling out this Love You So Much die. It does have the shadow layer, but I'm not going to use it. And I'm going to die cut that sentiment from Simon Says Stamp's new rich red matte metallic cardstock. It's so luxurious and so pretty, and it really pulls out the red color in my card. I also die cut that same sentiment from some white, and that's going to get stacked up on another piece of white and also then the rich red layer. So we'll have 3 die cuts stacked together to create a dimensional greeting. Because I'm not putting the shadow layer on here, I really wanted to make sure this was a bit dimensional so that way it stood off of the background nicely. I really tried to keep the card simple because I didn't want this card to get too busy. I wanted the watercoloring to be the focal point. So the last thing I did was I added a few embellishments from these JELLYBEAN half pearls from Lucy's Cards. The mix in here is gorgeous. It's a rainbow assortment of different colors, and I picked ones that matched well with the colors that I used in my card. So that's it. That is what I did to make this beautiful DIY watercolored card. Easy to do, not something that you're going to have to spend a ton of time doing, and you can have a beautiful watercolored card in no time at all. I hope that this idea was inspiring for you. I hope you enjoyed watching me put it together. And if you're interested in any of the products that I did use today, they are linked in the video description below as well as on my blog. So be sure to check that out. Until I see you all again, I hope you have a wonderful day and thanks for watching.